this morning, continuing our tour through this theme of creation, one of the most important themes. Of course, I say that about every theme I bring up, but it is one of the most important themes in the Bible. You know, what it means that we are created, that this universe is created, and what it means that God is the creator, capital C and singular. You know, we are touring this theme today, as last week, using these three readings as anchor points in the theme. And yes, you'll hear them one more time next week. We did read a little bit more of John, you may have noticed, than we read last week. You know, our readings last week, we were in Genesis. Then this week, we're going to be talking about John. Next week, on to Revelation, which was also written by John, by the way, the same John. Not to be confused with all the other Johns that John talks about in the Gospel of John. Anyway, moving on. You know, last week I argued that these three readings should best be taken together, that they should be read and understood together. They do inform each other. The Bible is built on these themes that keep piling up over time. So remember that last week, our first stop on the tour, the reading from Genesis chapter 1, remember that once upon a time, before the beginning of time, there was only chaos, as in the Greek concept of chaos with a capital C, this lifeless, unknowable, this void of nothingness, entropy, non-existence. And in this time before the beginning, chaos reigned supreme. But since we all do exist, at least we think we do, you know, ancient mythology and modern science, they have reached these shockingly similar conclusions about the beginning. That in ancient mythology, the gods, or in science, the forces of nature, must have somehow arisen out of chaos. But remember, this is not our story, not exactly. Because in our story, in this time before anything existed, God existed. And at some point before the beginning of time, God spoke, and there was light. The Bereshith bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the sky and the earth. In the beginning, God created all of reality. So last week, we talked about that moment before creation, before God speaks and there is light. The moment before what science can or ever will be able to measure and explore. And last week, we talked about what it means for God to be outside mortal reality. How the God of monotheism is fundamentally different from the gods of polytheism, the gods like Zeus, Poseidon, Thor, etc. And how this is particularly true, that these are fundamentally different concepts in Judeo-Christian monotheism, and how polytheism worships the natural forces of this reality, the earth, the sky, the storm, the fire, gravity. But we worship something that is fundamentally different, something that created all of those other forces, something so far outside and beyond this universe that we are not capable of actually comprehending it. And that's the point I want to really start with today. And have forever in the back of your minds as we go forward and move into John this morning. The reality that we should not, as mortal beings, have any concept of God. We should not be able to know God at all. Our limitations should make that impossible. We should be bound within the confines of this created reality. And yet we do have a concept of God. We do have an idea of something beyond. And why is that? It's because, well, John 1:1, en arche en holagas, or in the beginning was the Word. So many people will tell you, and they're not necessarily wrong, but they will tell you there are two accounts in the Gospels, two gospel accounts of Jesus's birth, the account from Matthew and the account from Luke. But there are actually three accounts of Jesus's birth. And they're all different. They all have different purposes to them. So the birth narrative in Matthew is nationalistic. It's concerned with human genealogy and also with the often twisted inner workings of worldly authorities as rulers vie with each other in fear of losing their own power. That's the birth narrative in Matthew. Now, the birth narrative in Luke is personal. It's familial. It's familiar. It's the intimate portrait of this young woman and her extended family. We're all joined together by bonds of blood and marriage and prophecy and also choice. But there is a third birth account. It's one that ties Jesus's human birth all the way back to the first spark of light in the nothingness before creation. This is the cosmic birth narrative. It's the birth narrative from the Gospel of John. It's the one that we read this morning. So if you notice a certain similarity, and I hope you did because that's why we're reading all three of these passages together, but if you notice a certain similarity between these first few verses in John and the first verses of Genesis, that's not a coincidence. In all likelihood, actually, John, a Jewish man educated in what we now call the Old Testament, in all likelihood, he was intentionally alluding back to Genesis 1 when he wrote the opening words of his gospel. And so both John and Genesis, they open with the exact same phrase, in, then brackets, the beginning. And you have to put the in brackets because writing in these two different languages, Hebrew for Genesis, Greek for John, they use the same grammatical structure and phrases in two different languages, which omits, in both languages, they omit the direct article the. And ironically, so literally it's just in beginning. And ironically, this was actually likely meant to emphasize the absoluteness of the statement. So both John and Genesis are referring to an ultimate beginning. It doesn't need to be specified as the beginning because it's beyond even that. It is the ultimate absolute beginning. The time that their science did not yet have words for, our science doesn't really either. A time when nothing of our created reality existed. And then John speaks of this entity, for lack of a better word. This entity called the Word. And this, again, is almost certainly, and I say almost certainly because nothing can be 100% certain, but almost certainly, this is an intentional reference to God speaking creation into existence back in Genesis chapter 1. It's another direct and almost certainly intentional allusion is John's frequent reference in this passage to the light. The light is the first thing God created according to Genesis 1. And then also light as in pure energy is also the first thing that science now hypothesizes came into being at the dawn of time. But John's light, the true light, it's deliberately more than the light that's created in Genesis 1. That light back in Genesis 1, that is a part of human reality. It's a part of time and space. It's something that God speaks into existence. John's light is connected to the concept of God's voice speaking, but it's actually the Creator himself. John's light exists eternally as God before time began, before the reality of our universe began. And we know this because John tells us that the light is the Word. These are two different terms John uses for the same thing, entity, whatever you want to call it. So right away there in verse 1, we're told this word existed in the beginning. And we know that as in Genesis 1, this in the beginning, it refers to the moment before creation as we know it. And we're told we know this because we're told all things came into being through the Word. So the Word must have existed before all things came into being. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word was God. So that's how we usually translate it, right? And I'm not entirely sure why, to be honest. Because there is a more accurate translation. It's really kind of weird to me. It's so weird. I actually did have to go, right as Gail was reading it, I went and just double checked it yet again. Every single time I talk about this, I have to double check and make sure what I'm saying is correct. Because it's just such a weird thing. There's a more accurate way to translate this simple statement that is in no way awkward in English. So the original Greek phrase, the word God comes before the word word. So the actual accurate way of translating this phrase is, and God was the Word, not and the Word was God. And so why we consistently translate it literally backwards, I do not know, unless there is in fact some kind of subliminal agenda out there that does want to de-emphasize what's actually being emphasized in this passage. And unfortunately, I can believe that is true because it's been true since the beginning of Christianity. This is one of the oldest efforts in Christianity to de-emphasize or to downplay the idea that Jesus actually is God. And that is easier to do if you read this particular phrase backwards. It just is. So sure, according to John 1, the Word was God, but maybe not totally God or something. Now, God was the Word leaves a lot less wiggle room. And that's the way it's actually written. So the Word was with God, and God was the Word. Anyone who does tell you, and there will be many people who do, many people in the academy, in the seminaries even, they tell you that the earliest Christians did not have an understanding of Jesus as truly God. Most of them are just misinformed, really. Some people are in denial. I can't rule out the idea that some people might be actually lying. The Christian belief in and worship of Jesus as God was not some later invention. It was not invented by the creeds or the church councils. It was a foundational part of Christian faith, from the beginning of Christian faith. That's just actually a historical fact. We find it written into the Bible. They hadn't worked out all the nuances of how that worked or functioned theologically, but it's there. It's where we come from historically, and so do with that what you will. Because yes, though, who does this word in John 1, ultimately turn out to be? And spoiler alert, the word is Jesus, right? And I say that, to be funny, but it also is kind of a spoiler. If you do just read the Gospel of John without knowing anything or bringing anything to it, John does kind of hide the identity of the Word for most of the first chapter. It's this mystery that gets revealed about halfway through the chapter when John, different John, not the John who wrote the Gospel of John, but anyway, when John the Baptist, yeah, there are a lot of Johns, but when John the Baptist reveals that mystery to his disciples, it's a mystery up until that point. And it's actually really well done, from a literary perspective. But yes, spoiler, turns out the Word is Jesus. And I said that, John chapter 1 is this third cosmic version of Jesus's birth story. But to be clear, in the beginning was the Word is not the cosmic account of Jesus's birth. It's the uncreated word, what we in Christianity have come to call the second person of the Trinity. And that is the terminology, is the invention of later creeds, but the idea behind it is not. But this uncreated word, second person of the Trinity, the Son, has no birth, has no beginning, and has no end. Where time itself begins and ends, God does neither. Remember, God is the Word. So the cosmic birth narrative comes later on in the chapter, and it comes when Holagos Sarx egeneto. Yes, I'm just going to unapologetically start speaking Hebrew and Greek now. But Holagos Sarx egeneto. Or in English, the Word became flesh. And let's just back up here and make sure we have the full force of this scene that I'm about to talk about. We're told that the true light, which gives light to every person, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, but the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many as did receive him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, and to those who believed in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh. Kai Holagos Sarx egeneto. And dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And the reason I'm repeating that phrase in Greek, Holagos Sarx egeneto, is because there is just something, it's actually one of the first phrases I ever memorized in another language. And there's just something about the way it sounds in Greek. There's a sharpness to the word sarx, which means flesh. Maybe if we translated and the word became skin, we might get closer. But if you just listen to it, sarx is this combination of my mic going out. Are you on? Nope. There we go. All right. We'll see how long that lasts. But, this word sarx is this combination of like the three sharpest sounds in any language that I'm familiar with. There's the S, which is really problematic. And I'm actually going against all my public speaking training to emphasize the S's, because especially when you're speaking into a mic, you're trained. Don't try to de-emphasize your S's. It's a problematic sound. The snakes hiss, this automatically sinister idea. And then,
the other microphone.
Should we try the other mic?
The other one should be live.
Let's try it. Why not?
It should have been already turned on.
It says it has one bar. It's working. We'll see. But you don't just have, in this one word, you don't just have it beginning and ending with s. You have between it the R sound, the lion's roar, another inherently sinister, threatening sound. And then the k, which is just this sharp sound. It's an interesting word. It's this coincidence of vocabulary that I think helps us to just physically kind of feel what's actually going on here in a way that the English translations just cannot capture. The idea that this word, this ethereal, all-powerful, eternally existent being outside of time and space, existing forever in glory unimaginable, that word chooses to become sarx. There's a physical quality to the Greek that the English can't match. Again, maybe if we use the word skin. And it's not just that one word either, right? The word logos also ends in an S. So you get the double S there. Logos, sarx. The word became flesh. Egeneto means became, just so we got the full spread of the words there. And then there's also putting those two together, the logos and the sarx. And that, so in English, we're locked into this really strict way that you can arrange words. The famous example is the difference between a dog bites a man and a man bites a dog, right? You just change the word order and it means something completely different. That's not how Greek grammar works. And so Greek has a lot more creativity when it comes to how they actually arrange their words. And so I am 80% certain that this arrangement of the words, combining these S's together, the sharpness of it, 80% certain that was, at least on some level, intentional. Yeah, this is the true force of what God chooses to do in this thing that we call the incarnation. God becomes sarx. Just let the sound of it and the cadence sink in. It's ho logos sarx egeneto. There's something in the Greek that is raw. It's primal. There's even a brutal quality to it. Something that speaks to this deeper truth of what it really means for the author of all time and space to become a part of time and space. And this is the unique miracle of Christianity. It's the one thing our story has that no other religious stories have. Ho logos sarx egeneto. The Word became flesh. God became a creature of skin and blood and bones and muscles and sinews, hunger, thirst, fatigue. Here eternity enters time. The creator of all things makes himself into a creation in order to save creation. Now, this phrase is the cosmic birth narrative of Christianity. It's actually why I am and ever will remain a Christian. There's nothing comparative to it. No independent concept, at least not that I have ever encountered in all of human myth and legend. There is no statement more profound that I have, again, ever encountered. This is the pinnacle of the divine revelation to humanity. When God becomes the revelation in flesh and bone and blood. And there's only a little bit left here, so I'm just gonna speak loudly. This is the bridge here. And the point I'm driving at this evening, the bridge between God and humanity, the bridge between the creator and the creation, between mortality and divinity. And this is also the bridge between Genesis and Revelation, our third reading. This idea that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. One of my theology professors, one of the best professors I had in seminary, as far as I'm concerned, she told us one day that she has this personal theory that the incarnation, God becoming flesh, was God's ultimate plan from the beginning, as in that moment before time began. That this was not some afterthought or mad scramble to fix a reality that humans had broken after we broke the universe, but that this was actually the whole point of creation from that moment when God first created creation. And this professor I had, she was very careful to make sure we understood that this was just her personal theory, that she had nothing really, no hard evidence to back it up. But everything I have read and studied since, both inside the Bible and outside, it does point in this direction. Because yes, as we will see in Revelation next week, the ultimate point of creation is indeed to be united with the Creator. This is salvation. And this moment, logos sarx egenito, this is the moment that makes that ultimate point possible. So coming up next week on Bristol Wesley Chapel, the reality show. But right now, there is no better summary that I can give for this than something that has already been written. And this is a song, it's by an artist called Michael Card, who has this profound ability to just cut to the exact point of what scripture is saying in his music. I highly encourage you to look him up on your own and listen to some of his songs. But before we move on to our next song this morning, and since I don't have a microphone, I may as well just do this while walking. We're gonna see if the computer will let me do this first. This is called The Final Word, Michael Card. Just sit, listen to the music. The words will be up on the screen too to read.